it's a change in lifestyle. Suddenly you're with your kids all the time, 24/7, and you now are not just their parent, but you're also a teacher and discipler, and suddenly there's more. It's just more. And I think sometimes angst is a good signal to us that the seasons are beginning to change. Something's happening. And it's a good time to take inventory of, is there a change? And you know, with God it's so funny because He doesn't always let us know the amazing things He has in store for us in the next season. He just says, listen, there's a season. When seasons change and the plow comes to the field and things begin to turn and all that's happening, that while we grieve the loss of what was, we also look forward with expectation at what God is doing in our lives. Hey everybody, welcome to Teaching Tips Thursday. I hope you're having a good week so far. So I want to talk a little bit about seasons in their teaching tips. It's probably one of my favorite topics. This doesn't just apply to homeschooling. It applies to parenting and life. And the older I get, the more I realize how relevant it really is. I don't have Brittany today. She's traveling. I think she's headed to New Orleans. And so I'm trying to kind of keep track of everything and everybody who's in. I saw that there was some people in the app who jumped on early to try to beat each other. I think Jess won the first in this time, so kudos Jess for that. The app is growing, and it's exciting to see the conversations that are going on, to see the kids that are being posted and the things that are happening in the group. So thank you for everybody in the app who's making that such an awesome experience. And okay, so let's talk about seasons. Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8 tells us for everything there's a season. And I think we need to grasp this. For everything, there's a season, right? And we get this type and shadow in nature that God gives us of seasons. There's spring, and in the spring, new things begin to grow. We have summer, where the season matures and the growing season is continuing, and there's warmth and there's comfort. And then we move into fall and the harvest, where we collect, and then we move into winter. And winter is a time of rest. It's a time of passing and a time of preparation. That type and shadow that we have, for everything there's a season. There's a time for the planting and adding. There's a time for the maturing. There's a time for the harvest, and then there's a time to say goodbye. When we grasp this in life, when we grasp the fact that there's a season for everything, and when we truly can appreciate when it's time to add something, when it's time to appreciate something, when it's time to accept the harvest from something, and then when it's time to let go, it helps us. It's a mental expectations, and really so much of our happiness in life comes from realistic expectations. It comes from when I can let go of some things and accept some new things in my life without carrying angst. Angst is a word that I would definitely point out. You feel it. The definition of angst would be a deep anxiety or a dread. So in this group now, we have a lot of new people coming in, new to homeschooling. And if you don't know yet, homeschooling can be a little overwhelming as you accept responsibility for training your children academically. But it's a change in lifestyle. Suddenly you're with your kids all the time, 24/7, and you now are not just their parent, but you're also a teacher and discipler, and suddenly there's more. It's just more, right? And it can be overwhelming. And you're trying to figure out who you are and what your identity is, and now how do you know, what are the expectations that people have on you and your kids and all of these things. And it can just begin to get heavy, and you can begin to feel this angst. Now, in life, in marriage, in parenting, in life in general, with health issues or financial issues or relationships that we have, changes in churches and organizations and all of these things, we can begin to feel this angst. And I think sometimes angst is a good signal to us that the seasons are beginning to change. Something's happening. And it's a good time to take inventory of, is there a change? So this concept of seasons, to me, why it's so valuable is it helps me to appreciate that change is happening and change is normal. Even though Brittany's not here, I see she's stirring up the app. Kudos, Britt. Okay, so I'm distracted. I don't have her here to bring me back on track. When the seasons change, I think we have to also accept the idea that there's different things that are necessary in different seasons, right? So I've used this in the past. Some of these things are in the past, not all together, but one of the things I would point out, like a coat. When we lived in Western New York, up around Buffalo, it was cold in the winter, and you would wear heavy coats and scarves, and you would put on your thick wool socks and your flannel underwear, and you would layer up, right? Because that was winter, and you were going to be cold pretty much from the end of October until April. You were going to be cold, and so you would prepare for this winter. But then the spring would come, and you would begin shedding and preparing for the warmer weather. If you just said, okay, winter is over and spring is here, maybe I'll go get a new spring shirt, but I'm not going to give up my coat or my heavy socks or my scarf or my hat. I'm going to carry that forward too. It's not very long before you will burn out. Like, you will just melt. Right? How many layers of clothing from each of the seasons could you wear before you actually it became unhealthy? Like, you have to adapt to the seasons. And I think part of that comes from knowing that the seasons have changed, and what the needs were from the previous season, what was and what the needs were, may not be appropriate for the season that you're entering. So in homeschooling especially, when you add on more responsibility, or maybe you add a baby, or some of these things. We've had 9 children, and every time we added a child, it was a new season. And I remember as we got up towards 7, 8, 9, we had 4 children under the age of 5. 4 boys under the age of 5. One with special needs that we had adopted. And I can remember it was more than what we could handle, but at the same time we were building a business and we were very active in ministry. And there came a place where some of the seasons, some of the things that had served us in previous seasons, we had brought forward into the next season, and it became too much. And it became time where we had to start doing an inventory and saying, even though this served us well, and it's a good thing, and it may not be, it wasn't a bad thing, but we need to realize it's not appropriate to bring into this season. And when we did that, it's okay to let go of some of those things that are bogging us down. The angst, though, of the tensions, and it's not always easy, right? Because sometimes you have to let go of things that you love or that were dear to you, and had value to you. For me, leading worship was one of the things that held value, and it was hard to let go of that season. When it came time to sell our business, we sold our business in 2010 to Christian book distributors, and letting go of that for Kristen and I was brutal, because we had spent 8 years building it. It was like a baby to us, and yet the season was changing, and that was one of those things that the Lord had called us to and said, it's time to let go of this. It's not appropriate for the next season. And with God, it's so funny, because he doesn't always let us know the amazing things he has in store for us in the next season. He just says, listen, there's a season, right? Now think of farming, because this is a type and shadow that we can tie to. Type and shadow is like a metaphor. It's something we can look at and draw truths from that we can apply to our lives. And in Scripture, we see all kinds of types and shadows in the Old Testament that reveal truths to us in the New Testament and in our lives today. But we see that around us as well. And so a type and shadow is farming. In the spring, we have you plant, and you do that in faith. And so you begin to prepare the fields. I think this is so important, okay? Preparing the fields for the next season can be brutal. If you live in farmland, when the plows come in, you have these big plows, and they dig deep into the soil, and they take everything that's in that from that previous year, and they turn it over and flip it, and then they break it down, and they'll go through a field with these huge tractors and these huge plows, and they'll just take that whole field and take everything that was and turn it upside down, and everything that was becomes the food and fertilizer for the next season to come. But it's like a violent process, right? It's like, but you can't just go and plant seeds in the old what was. You just can't. You have to prepare the soil. And so springtime is a time to prepare the soil, and it's time to take what was, in some cases, turn it upside down, let it break down, be flipped over, so that becomes the food and the fertilizer for what God is doing in our lives in the next season. And we have to do that in faith. I recently heard a quote that said, the guy was talking, he said, you don't have like a will problem, you have a patience problem. You have the problem that you want everything now, and because it isn't happening now, then you don't have the will. If you just had a patience, you would know that what you're doing today is going to have dividends in the future. That really spoke to me, because it's a patience issue. It's a faith. Sometimes it's just patience. It's trusting that even though I can't see the harvest that's coming, or I can't see what God is doing in my life today, He's called me to let go of things, and to allow the plow to turn them over, flip it over, prepare the soil for what's happening. Farmers are good at this because they've been through the process enough times that they know every spring we're going to prepare. We really don't know what the harvest is going to be, because there's going to be challenges getting to a harvest. But this is normal. And every season there's different tasks that need to be done, different things that need to be done through each season. And if you've gone through more and more seasons of life, Kristen and I have been through a few now, as you go through more of these seasons in life, you begin to realize when God is beginning to turn the soil, it's okay, because He's beginning a new work. He's beginning to prepare us for a new harvest. That's important, because I remember as a young person, when the plow first, as the tractor first came into the field with this big plow and dug it into the soil and began to turn it, I would resist it. I would want to lay down in front of the tractor and say, "No, God, what are you doing? Don't do this. Don't do this. We don't want to see our lives upended and turned upside down." And so I would fight that. And then, the whole time I would grieve the loss of everything that was, instead of realizing and appreciating that everything that was is now giving nutrition to what is becoming. And so there's that aspect of, as you've gone through the seasons, when you see the plow now, you're like, okay, God, this season is ending. And you've accomplished a good work in this season. And you've given us, a harvest, maybe even a time of rest, and now it's time to prepare us again to move on. So homeschooling can be this way. homeschooling comes in and you're like, well, our kids were in school and they played sports and I had friends and we did all these things together, and then all of a sudden you start homeschooling and like everything's changing. My relationships are changing with people. My kids had friendships, and now all of a sudden those friendships don't seem to be working anymore. And understanding that this is a new season. Homeschooling is a whole new lifestyle and can bring with it a whole new changes. And in that, even understanding it's okay. It's okay if relationships change. It's okay if things change. It may not be, we may grieve the loss. I think it's okay to grieve the loss of friendships and relationships, or be participating in sports or having school colors or whatever. Those things were things that we enjoyed in previous seasons. And now that that's changing, we may lose, there's a loss. And when there's a loss, it's okay to grieve that. It's not, but we can also be excited and teach our kids that when seasons change and the plow comes to the field and things begin to turn and all that's happening, that while we grieve the loss of what was, we also look forward with expectation at what God is doing in our lives. And today is a season. It's the beginning of a new season, a planting season, but it's not the only season. Sometimes we go through life believing that it's all going to be one season, like life is just what it is, and that's not the case. Throughout, there's cycles in life. There are seasons in life. And we have to prepare ourselves for that and that expectation. So we have that. When I was a teenager, we lived in Western New York, which if you're familiar at all with Western and Central New York, there's a lot of grapes and wineries and fruit farms and vegetable farms and all of that. Well, I worked on grape farms at a winery, and every year during the winter, right? So we'd have this harvest in the fall. They'd come through and take all the grapes and they'd make wine out of them. And then winter would come. The leaves would all fall off them, and you'd have this tangled mess of vines that were just sitting there. Fields and fields of these massive tangled vines that were the product of last year's harvest. And so I was on a crew that would come in during the winter, and you'd be there all day, Saturdays and Sundays and vacations in the snow and cold, and you would begin trimming. And if you ever take a look at what it takes to trim grapes, like if you go to YouTube and do a video search for trimming grapes. Now technology's changed a little bit, and some of the grape growing process have changed a little bit in the last 30 years. But when they take these grapevines, and some of these vines are old, I mean they were way older than I was, and they take this massive bush and they trim it down to like a stump with a couple of branches and just a few vines left over from last year. And so like you're reducing this thing by 60 to 80%. You're just cutting away everything that was before, and then you tie it up on the grapevine, and then you move on. And it takes a lot of faith to take this plant and just begin hacking at it and cutting out all what looks like life that is no longer necessary. In fact, if you left it, all the energy from the vine would go into the branches and it wouldn't bear any fruit. And so farmers know that in order for the energy from the vine and all the nutrients to go to the fruit and have good fruit, you need to cut away all of this extra growth that isn't productive. Scripture even talks about He's the vine, we are the branches, and He prunes us and He cuts away things in us that are taking away from us bearing fruit. So this analogy that we also have of farmers having the faith to say, okay, this vine may have produced fruit and goodness in this last year, but I need to trim this so that the coming season there's enough nutrients coming out of the vine and into the branches so that the fruit gets all that they have. So it will have the right sweetness and the fruit will grow and will have life. Same again in parenting and in family. There's a time where we have to look at this massive grapevine, if you will, of life, and say, this branch bore fruit last year, but if I'm going to be healthy and productive, and if my family is going to receive the nutrients and all that I have, I'm going to have to cut away some of this and focus on the things that matter in this season. And so letting go of that, some of these things is, as hard as it can be, it can be beautiful in and of itself. Let's see. Okay, so like I said, we had a business and 9 kids and everything. We came to this place in 2010 where my oldest was preparing for marriage. And I remember we took a trip as a family. It was our last time of traveling with everybody, all 9 kids in the van, and it was a big trip and very emotional trip. And at the same time, the Lord was stirring in us to let go of the business, and He was calling us to full-time ministry, which wasn't where my heart was really, but I would do what the Lord required of me. And I just didn't have a lot of faith, but we'd come to the place where we knew it was necessary. And so we let go of the business, and I went into pastoring, and then along the way, it was at a homeschool convention at the Leah Convention in Rochester, New York, and Kristen, my wife, who is a curriculum development editor here, met the masterbooks booth. And I went to some event with the kids, and Kristen stayed and talked, and she was explaining who we were and the past that we had with homeschool curriculum and her experience, and then said, yeah, we've always, we love masterbooks products. We just wish that there was a way it was easier for homeschoolers to use. And that was it. It was just a nice conversation. And down the road, not long down the road, Tim and Kristen connected by one of the salespeople that was there. And Tim asked her if she'd be willing to come and work with them and consult with them. And over the period of the next few years, Kristen worked. We had parent lesson plans, and if you were early on, they were the yellow and blue books that we had starting in 2012, where we took a lot of our books and began doing that. And then the Lord began to warn me that in the church we had done what we were called to do, and that the seasons were going to change. And that I had about 2 years there before He was going to do something different, and to just prepare ourselves for this. And sure enough, almost 2 years to the date, I got a phone call from Tim who said, hey, would you be interested in coming and being my VP of marketing, because he knew that we had experience, and I had built a website, and e-com was my love. And the opportunity to serve homeschoolers again and to participate in the ministry here at Masterbooks was just, it was a dream job come true. It was exactly what I would have wanted. And the Lord had prepared the church, and we were off into the races. And so that was 5 years ago. And then I look at today, and I see the number of families that are touched. I see the opportunities we have to invest in the kingdom, and the blessing that you all are to us. Even in a season like breast cancer that we went through in the last year, what a blessing this community was in praying and reaching out and caring for us. Huge. I can't even begin to say thank you enough for that. But in 2010, when the Lord was saying, this season is ending, and there's going to be some pruning, and there's going to be some upturning of the soil, and it may not be comfortable, right? It wasn't easy. But look at the season down in the future, the harvest season, and what an awesome, incredible blessing it was, moving from one season into the next, which took us to the next and leads us here. And so I offer that as an encouragement that for some of you who are in a spot where life is overwhelming right now, like you're trying to meet everybody's expectations. you're wearing your winter coat, your spring coat, you've got your summer clothes in a bag, and you're trying to cram your fall hoodies under another arm. To seek the Lord and ask Him for wisdom. Are there some branches that maybe could be pruned? Are you moving into a season that requires you to let go of some things, to embrace some new things? There's the scripture about no one puts new wine in an old wineskin because it'll burst the old wineskin. And it's kind of tragic, really. I just listened to a podcast recently where he's talking about seasons of manhood, and that there's a time to be a boy, and then you become a young man, and then you become a man, and then you move into the place of elder. And where he was classifying everybody, he was moving me into the place of elder. And to think that I no longer qualify as a young man or a man, but now that I would qualify as an elder, there's almost something in you that resists that, right? Because who wants to be an old wineskin if you're going to miss out on new wine? But at the same time, that's the cycle of life that God gave us. None of us, life is always changing, and appreciating the season of life and the seasons of where we are offers so much value. And so as I begin to let go of who I was in those other seasons to embrace what the Lord is calling me as an elder in the seasons of manhood, I'm finding joy in that, because I'm able to let go of some of those expectations and to let go of some of those things to embrace this new season. Well, I'd encourage you, as you move into homeschooling and you move into parenting, to just be open to the idea that sometimes seasons require pruning and preparation of the soil in order to produce the fruit that God has. And sometimes, because He's much wiser than us, if we're not willing to do it ourselves, He begins to force that. I'll end with one more story. There was a company that we worked for, and I was working my way up the ranks. I had an awesome mentorship, but we were a young family. We were just starting out. Finances were tight. The Lord had opened up the opportunity for Kristen to babysit, and the extra money was awesome. She appreciated having the blessing of some extra funds to buy clothes for the kids or whatever. But she started to feel the Lord saying, that season is ending. I'm calling you to doing something new. But man, it's hard to let go. And so she just could not let go. Well, any of you who've had babies and nursing know that mastitis can be an awful painful thing. In fact, I think Kasha, if you're watching, was dealing with that yesterday. Sympathies. As a dad who has sat in an emergency room with a wife who is suffering from that, with many kids waiting to hear an answer, it's an awful thing to watch your wife go through that. But the Lord knew that Kristen was, she just kept kind of adding, and there was a place where He needed to clear away some stuff in order to pour her into new opportunities. And finally she came to the place where she just said, okay, God, I can't carry it all, and so I'm going to start letting go of this in obedience and trusting that you know what you're doing and you're preparing us for a new season. It was like the next day, or it was that week, that I got a notification that the company I was working for changed my classification, and that I was going to be getting a $15,000 raise, which was just a huge blessing and more than took care of everything she had been making in babysitting and whatnot. And it freed her up to begin doing other things and serving in other ways. And so that's the way God has worked, And I always say, I don't want to overstay a season, because I'd really rather I begin making the changes than God coming in and making the changes, because He seems to be a lot swifter and quicker at it than I am. But I enjoy, I trust Him now a lot more than I did in the past. So, okay. So, Ecclesiastes 3, 1-8, for everything there is a season. And maybe you're well in a season and life is good, and that's good. And maybe you're in a season where this relates a little bit. You just feel that prick of, yeah, there are some things that I'm holding on to that they were good in the past season. But it's time to look for ways to give myself some breathing room, right? I got to have capacity. How can I grow if I don't have capacity? How can I invest and plan into my children if I'm sapped? Sometimes it's as simple as saying there was a season where being in social media 20 hours a day was good, right? But maybe I need to put my phone down and not be in social media as much, or whatever. I mean, there's you know the things as I'm speaking. If there is anything you can feel, yeah, that's heavy to me. There's angst, but I also feel the sadness of letting that go. But I would just encourage you, as somebody who's gone through seasons, to trust that when God does that, He also is like He has the big picture in mind. And sometimes this takes even more patience and more trust. God is eternal, so He's outside of the here and now, and He's outside of next summer. He's eternal, and so sometimes the things that He's doing in us is preparing us for eternity. It's preparing us for Him to spend eternity with us. It's not even about the physical and what He's doing. And so even when it doesn't make sense that something is happening in my life and the seasons are changing, and there's no possible way this could serve us today or tomorrow or maybe next year, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have value in an eternal perspective. And so I think we have to be mindful of that as well, that God has bigger seasons for us. There's the season of life and then the season after life. And so sometimes He's working on us there as well. Okay, well, I hope this teaching tip was a blessing. I hope that if you feel anxiety and stress, that just even thinking about, is there things that maybe I could let go, or maybe there's things I need to embrace. Maybe it's just a new season and I need to embrace new relationships and find some mentors and some people that can speak into my life. Maybe there's that. It doesn't always have to be a letting go. Sometimes if it's spring, it's a time to plant and a time to build. So it can be that as well. So it's all a good thing. Seasons are good because God created seasons and He created good. So, okay. Well, we are praying for this group. We are praying for homeschool in general. All of you, as you begin this journey, the next journey, all of our families. The world is crazy right now, and we just want everybody to know that we are interceding and praying that the Lord protects your family and that He gives you wisdom and He blesses you and that He gives you the strength to continue in the journey He's called you to.